They say, oh, well, not everybody can afford to buy better food, right? Well, the stupid thing about it is if the government, through our tax dollars, wasn't subsidizing the production of this unhealthy food,
Right.
we could be producing organic and regenerative, high grade, chemical free, like incredibly nutritious food
Yeah.
at quantity and be competitive with conventional, if not more affordable than conventional.
And we'd be getting smarter and healthier every day
Yeah.
instead of dumber and dumber.
But the reason why it's what's affordable and available to most of the population is because our tax dollars are subsidizing those practices.
This is Spirit Gym. Today, Paul is talking with Jake Takiff, who owns Cedar Springs Farm in Hotchkiss, Colorado. Jake has performed an astounding farming transformation, taking an overgrazed ranch in the high desert and turning it into a lush, perennial food forest. He accomplished this by practicing agroforestry, water management, and rotational grazing, all of which and more he will be talking about on this episode called Farming, Our Path to Health and Freedom. Thank you for listening to this podcast, which would not be possible without you, our subscribers, and also our premier sponsors, Organifi, Bioptimizers, Paleo Valley, and Wild Pastures. The sponsors' special offers and discounts mentioned in this episode, or you can visit the show notes page at paulchek.com/podcast.
Hello, you guys. Welcome to Spirit Gym with me, Paul Chek. Today, I'm super excited to share Jake Takiff. Jake is an expert on farming and many other things, as you're going to find out. And I am super excited to have Jake with us today. I learned of Jake on the Medicine podcast, which is excellent. That's with Mimi and Chase Ramey, two of my best friends. And I absolutely loved every minute of that podcast. Today, I'm going to take a slightly different approach than Mimi and Chase did, so you could listen to both podcasts and still gain a lot of useful information. So, Jake, welcome. It's super exciting to have you with me. I really loved what you shared and your whole philosophy. And I don't know if I mentioned it to you, but I grew up on a 142-acre sheep farm on Vancouver Island, and I've studied soil science quite extensively and have been lecturing on the soil and its importance to human health, God, for so friggin' long, probably since 1990. And it's sometimes makes me concerned that it doesn't seem like very many people are listening.
Absolutely.
But could you share some of your personal story and how you became the man you are and what inspires you and what led you to your devotion to regenerative agriculture and farming as a whole?
Well, first of all, yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity to just be able to spread the word about soil, about our, where we're at, with where our food comes from in our society today. It's really my place of passion right now is not just growing food for my own family, my own community, but helping to educate others on how they can get involved, grow their own food, be self-sufficient, and also just to educate them on why the food system is the way it is today, why it's broken, and why we're feeling all the effects of that in our society. What brought me to this point right now, I guess, is I was very fortunate at a young age. My parents aren't farmers. I didn't grow up in a farming family, but I lived in a community with farms. I lived in a rural area and had access from a very young age working on farms and getting exposed to amazing mentors, people who taught me an incredible amount about agriculture. And what I feel most fortunate about is that the people I learned how to farm from, they were regenerative farmers before that was a name, before that was cool. And before there was all this hype around regenerative farming, there have always been people practicing these sustainable practices, these low input, these systems based on creating really high quality products that are regionally appropriate. And I fell in love with it. I, like a lot of young people, was having a very hard time as a young person trying to find my place in this world, was really disturbed by what I was seeing on a large scale with our food system and, with everything, with government, with health, with it all just seemed really disturbing to me. And none of it made sense. When I got more deep into farming and into working with animals, I guess I found a purpose in life. I found a responsibility and haven't stopped since. So I've farmed in New England, New Hampshire, Vermont, through that region when I was younger. That's where I grew up. after high school, I went out and I farmed in California and Oregon on the West Coast, from where I actually ended up going to Hawaii. I bought a plane ticket to Hawaii when I was about 19 and ended up living there for 5 years, working on permaculture farms and doing some of my own operations as well. I kept some cattle on a bamboo farm in Hawaii. I did kind of jungle agriculture over there.
Yeah. Cool.
Moved from there to Colorado. So went from the jungle at sea level to essentially the high desert in 2012, or 2011 actually is when I went to Colorado. And I've been in Colorado ever since. I spent about 5 years Front Range north of Boulder, running a dairy farm. I had Jersey milk cows. We raised hogs. We did raw milk dairy farm.
Great.
Eventually was able to move from the Front Range over to the Western Slope, which is where I farm today. And, that coincided with meeting my wife coming into my life, us starting a family together, and us really figuring out how we want to treat this piece of land out here in Hotchkiss, Colorado. It's called Cedar Springs Farm. And the story of it is I bought it for essentially very cheap. It was advertised as a very dry, kind of barren piece of land. There wasn't a lot going on for it. It did have the topography and, from what I could tell, some groundwater to work with. And so over the course of the first couple years, essentially put in a water management system, caught what little, we get about 10 inches of precipitation a year here. So we're definitely high desert. And setting up catchment, being able to catch all the water that hits our farm, soak it in, spread it out across the landscape. The first couple years, we put in 10,000 trees. We put in, essentially an elaborate water management agroforestry system. And then we proceeded to rotationally graze it with cattle and hogs every year. And within actually just a few years, we saw a complete turnaround. Our farm went from being sagebrush and knapweed, a very invasive allelopathic weed that takes over the landscape out here, transformed into essentially a grassland with silvopasture trees. So, honey locust, mulberry, apple, pear, walnuts, hazelnuts, all coming up through the grasses everywhere. We've just continued to move the cows through it every year, improving the soil, improving our water retention, digging more ponds, creating more habitat for wildlife, and essentially doing it at a profit. And that's the model that we created here. It's the model that we teach, and it's the model that is what I believe to be scalable and replicatable across many regions in the US and across the world as well.
Yeah, just for the listeners, I watched the video interview on the Medicine podcast, and there's a lot of great footage and pictures of your farm, and it's absolutely gorgeous. I mean, you would never know looking at the greenery and the pastures and the trees and, the environment that it was in the high desert. So, I was just really very impressed with how you've transformed that and brought it back to life. And the commercial farming industry has really caused a massive increase in the desertification of our farmlands. And I remember years ago, I was putting a lecture together for my students at the Institute, and I believe I used Google Maps, but I found a picture of El Centro, California, which is a big farming area. And I found one that was like 10 or 15 years older, and you could actually see the size of the desert. Then I found a current one, and you could see the desert had grown tremendously right into what once was the farming territory. And it's pushing, they got all these massive corporate cattle ranches out there, and, the miles of animals in tiny little pens. And you could see how all that activity was actually growing the desert. But in a lot of the books I've studied, interestingly, they say that once that soil reaches that point that you can't rehab it anymore. Yet guys like you and others that I've studied have shown that that's not correct, that you can actually rehabilitate that land. And I think that's very promising for our future, because I've got a book in my library. I can't remember the author's name, but in the book, it's all about the soil. And it says by the year 1961, I believe, which is the year I was born, 62% of the farmable land of the United States had been desertified, and that the topsoil was dead. And that was in 1961. The problem, as you know, Jake, is so few people have a clue about any of this. I mean, I couldn't even guess parts per million as a metaphor of people that are even have a clue of anything to do with their food, where it comes from, the state of the soil, what's being done to our environment. I mean, they're so caught up in the digital illusion of life that they are not present with the reality that makes life happen. And I think that's one of the reasons that I use my podcast to try to educate people on as many of these things as possible, because these are really life and death situations. We're really at a dangerous tipping point where if we keep doing what we're doing, I'll use an analogy. The Tai Chi symbol, right? Yin and yang. In my studies of the physics and metaphysics and all the related aspects of that symbol, Victor Schauberger, who I imagine you're aware of, the Austrian forest ranger that was an expert on water. Are you familiar with him at all?
Not too much, actually.
Oh my God, you would love his books. Victor Schauberger.
Okay.
Just search that name on Amazon. Most of his books were translated by Callum Coates, but they're loaded with stuff that you would find fascinating that's really applicable to your farm. Water. He's considered today to be the world's leading expert in water, even though he's long been dead.
Wow.
I could go for hours on Victor Schauberger, but he shows in there that if either force, yin, the feminine, the black side of the Tai Chi symbol, which is the black fish with the white eye, or yang, the masculine, with the black fish with the black eye, meaning that yin can only become yang and yang can only become yin. He says if either of those forces reach 96%, the other one will cease to exist. For example, if you just put it simply, if you take a pot of water and put it on a fire, metaphorically, what he's saying is that once the pot of water dwindles down to where there's only 4% left, the ability to regenerate that energy is beyond the point of return. In other words, you'll break the natural cycle.
It's like the point of no return.
Yes. And I get concerned because having looked at tons and tons of research on this stuff and books and studied a lot of this information, we're pushing the red line. Like there's only so far. We got to think, like, there's almost 8 billion people on the planet, if not 8 billion or more. And the way we've managed the resources, and you got countries like China that only 14% of China's landmass is arable. And China is as bad as the United States with the use of chemicals and bad farming technologies. It used to be one of the leaders in farming, but now it's just been Americanized. How far can we go? I'm not asking this as a question. I'm asking as an open question. How far can we go before all of a sudden we just collapse the natural cycles of nature and she can't regenerate? When you start getting people like the globalists and all these people doing cloud seeding and fucking with the natural hydrology, the hydrological cycle, and all the crap that's going on, you're throwing yet another X factor, and then all the chemtrails and on it goes. I mean, when you stack all this shit up, it's like, holy hell, we are fucking poking the dragon here. People just aren't aware of how dangerous and precarious the situation is. The main reason I wanted to talk to you is because you have demonstrated, as has other farmers that have the same orientation that you do, that we actually can turn these things around using natural principles. We can produce healthy food, non-toxic food, nutritious food, and even starting from pretty much dead land as a working concept. So my next kind of question here is, the majority of the population seems to be confused regarding what free-range regenerative farming is. Some confuse it with what is typically referred to as organic farming. Some think it is commercial farming with more space for animals. The vegans and vegetarians feel it's just another act of cruelty to animals. Could you clear the air on this, maybe different classifications, because there might be different styles of that being done, but most people wouldn't know what the words mean if they were signifiers out there?
What's interesting about this particular question is that at this point right now, there's no real agreement necessarily between all farmers, between everybody in the space about what regenerative farming even is. It became a buzzword very fast. It can represent a lot of different styles of farming. Like you had just mentioned, with how dire it is getting right now, with how toxic our food system has become, how normalized poison in our food has become, how normalized it is to just absolutely trash ecosystems left and right. It's obviously more important than ever to be utilizing these improved techniques which ones of them are technically regenerative or not is actually undecided in some ways by the general community. I have my own opinions. If it were up to me, in a way, I would not even be out here sticking my neck out, because I'm sure a lot of people will disagree with my interpretations. That being said, I believe it's important enough that I'm willing to stick my neck out.
I don't give a fuck what people think about your opinions, because you are sitting on the proof.
Right.
You are living, breathing, eating, shitting, and sharing the proof. There's an old saying, never judge a man by the creed he or she professes, but by the life he or she leads. Having seen your farm and listened to your podcast and a background in farming, it doesn't take me 1 millisecond to look at your farm and go, whatever the hell he's doing, it's working.
What I've kind of settled on as like, what is my version of the highest use of a piece of land I'm a custodian of? How do we, like, what is this regenerative farming? Because in a way, we've been doing it since before it was named. Now it has a name, and the name regenerative. So what does this imply? It means that a system would essentially regenerate itself. Do I believe it's going to do it fully on its own right away? No way. It's got to be set up properly. We have
nurtured.
We have to manage it properly. We have to mimic natural cycles. We have to install certain either earthworks or tree plantings, bring in different livestock. These are all inputs to get the ball rolling, to start that positive feedback cycle. In my opinion, a regenerative farm is a farm that's either striving towards that, working towards weaning themselves off of inputs to create a system that can essentially self-regenerate, self-sustain, or a farm that's already reached that point. It's looking at farming a little differently than we do as a culture. Right now, we look at farming as it's quite extractive, taking a piece of land, essentially taking an ecosystem and sterilizing it, creating the crops we need until it's exhausted, and then moving on. That it's a extractive process. The idea of regenerative farming is that we actually leave it better every year. Every year it's a little better, and every year we require less inputs from the outside world. And not only does the weaning ourselves off of inputs make the farm more ecologically sound, it also is the best case for regenerative farming financially. Inputs are really expensive. If you look at most operations, most farmers, myself included, we're making money. The products are worth money. It's the fact that the inputs are so high, and that's why we're not showing, like, that's why the profit is so hard to actually pocket at the end of the day. You can produce, a bin of apples. Just to make the math easy, if it's $100 for the bin, you spent $101 on inputs. At the end of the day, what's the point, first of all? And second of all, what's the point of doing that at a loss, especially if we're just trashing the place in the process of doing so? So the idea to me of regenerative farming is reassessing these landscapes as ecosystems. We're looking at the soil beneath our feet. We're looking at sunlight and how we can maximize our harvesting of sunlight. All farmers, we're basically all sun worshipers. We're just trying to catch as much of that energy as we can from that sun and turn it into physical, nutritious product. We're looking at sunlight, we're looking at soil, there's also the whole approach. We're looking at all the species, the biodiversity, the wildlife, our communities that are eating the food. And we're trying to create these systems that will, with proper management, regenerate themselves, essentially forever. We have to put ourselves into the picture. We are a keystone species. We are a very powerful tool when used properly. We can use our minds and our bodies and our technologies to essentially create paradise. It's all about how we choose to manage these landscapes. We can, and it's a paradigm shift. It's a different way of looking at farming. I feel like the word farming, even, it has so much baggage. The way that I choose to run my farm and the way that a lot of my clients are doing the same, and a lot of my friends in this community, and we're not looking at it as a what can I get out of this kind of deal. It's more of a reciprocal relationship with the landscape, and one that is more of a legacy, something that will be passed down to future generations and provide the highest quality food, for the people we love, so that we don't essentially suffer from the ailments that, the general public is being bombarded with right now, the way the health system is and the food system.
To me, what you're describing is that you're living in a relationship with the land, and commercial farming is a dictatorship.
It's a straight business model for profit. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter how much soil you lost. It's about what it looks like on the books. You spend this much on seed, you spend this much on chemical, you spend this much on other inputs, diesel, tractor maintenance. And at the end of the day, how many bushels did you get? And if you didn't get enough, don't worry, you get subsidized anyway. It's a very broken way of looking at it compared to a relationship.
Yeah, that same book I was referring to earlier, I'll try to remember to dig up. I've got several excellent books that are older books that are pointing out shocking statistics a long time ago. And even reading the book then, it would have been shocking. But the author said, having studied the history of farming families, that the average farming family at the time of the writing of the book destroyed 7,000 acres of farmland beyond repair, which really just goes to show, the trail of death that's left behind what should be more of a recapitulation of nature's intelligence instead of abolishing nature's intelligence.
With the Industrial Revolution, and then in the 70s with the get big or get out mentality, there was a huge shift of control from small family farms who cared about their farms, cared about their soil, cared about their crops. It shifted from that towards a very small amount of very large companies that control most of the money flowing through agriculture now and most of the real estate. So that was a big shift. And it used to be people who really cared about their home. It was their home. It wasn't just a farm. It was their home place. And then it became more like, well, we can do millions of acres on, for this much. And it's a complete transition of power at that point in the 70s. And it greatly affected the way that we've interacted with our landscapes.
Hi, everybody. I sure hope you're enjoying the podcast. A couple of months ago, Organifi sent me a couple of bags of their new Shilajit gummies to sample, and I was blown away with how great they taste and how much my body loved them. Having used Shilajit paste for many years, I've never been a big fan of the taste of it, but when I tried Organifi's new Shilajit gummies, I was truly impressed. The texture and consistency of the gummies is excellent, and they have just enough natural sweetness to let me feel like I'm getting a lovely, healthy treat for both my mind and my body. Shilajit is a unique, potent mineral paste from the Himalayan mountains. It contains an abundance of trace minerals, antioxidants, organic acids, and nutrient-transporting compounds. It's been known throughout history to help boost vitality and strength. Just pop a couple gummies and chew, or suck on them slowly for a steady release of the delicious, earthly, but slightly sweet natural flavor. Your taste buds will enjoy the delicious treat while your body soaks up the massive amounts of feel-good nutrition. Rich in fulvic acid, humic acid, vitamins, enzymes, bioflavonoids, antioxidants, metabolites, and over 40 trace minerals, Shilajit gummies can help support energy production, support performance and recovery, support healthy muscles, promote collagen synthesis, support healthy hormone levels, increase cellular energy, decrease fatigue, and promote heart health. I absolutely love Organifi's Shilajit gummies and went through 2 bags in no time because my body craved them so much. I reached out to Organifi to get more right away, and I bet you will too. To get your 20% off for Living 4D listeners on your Shilajit gummies, go to Organifi, organifi.com/CHEK20. On checkout, use the promo code capital C, capital H, capital E, capital K, 20. That's Chek 20 on checkout to get your 20% discount on your awesome Shilajit gummies. I honestly love these things. I know you're going to be just amazed with how great they taste and how good they feel. Have you ever heard of Harvey Levenstein, who wrote the book Paradox of Plenty and Revolution at the Table?
I have not.
I think you'd find both of those books fascinating. They're really well done. He points, I believe it's him. I've read so many books, sometimes I get where I got the information confused, but I'm pretty sure it was him, said that during the First and Second World War, when so many American soldiers were away and the women had to take over the farms, crop production went up significantly, crop health improved significantly, and the rates of disease amongst human beings went significantly down. But when the men came back from war and took over the farms again, the crops began to not produce as well. The animals weren't as healthy. And so it really highlighted the fact that we have this problem of a patriarchal, masculine, I'm going to control you, force things to happen attitude that isn't really optimal for engaging plants nor animals. And that when we have this feminine energy, which of course a man can express too, that there is a nurture factor. And when you look at all the research on plants, like The Secret Life of Plants by Tompkins and Bird, and the work of Cleve Baxter and much of Steiner's teachings, there's no question that plants are highly sentient beings and that they do respond to our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions.
Don't tell vegans that, though.
Well, I know. Believe me, I've written some articles addressing that, and I put it together a five podcast series called The Honest Vegetarian, and went through that very carefully at every level. So believe me, I know the whole thing. I've had to rehab lots of sick vegetarians, so we don't even need to start down that road, or I'll get wound up.
That's a whole rabbit hole.
Yeah, there's a great book. It's by Jane Buxton, The Great Grain-Based Con, I had a great podcast with Jane Buxton, and she really just shows you the science on vegetarianism and veganism and how dangerous it is and how false the arguments are, and how children that are raised on vegan and vegetarian diets have abnormal growth and development. They have changes in their brain that can't be repaired, bone structure changes. I mean, it's just, this is one of the problem with an ism, right? Whenever you've got an ism, it means that you're now in a belief system and you're referring to some authority figure, and you're becoming a child with a surrogate mommy, daddy figure. And you basically are in a cult-like situation where people don't think for themselves, and all belief systems are closed. And so as soon as you're part of a belief system, by definition, you stop asking questions because you think you know the answers to anything relevant.
It's a dangerous thing. And it's you look at it even with like the two-party system in our political system, everything from politics to health, everything. As soon as somebody will identify so strongly with a party or an ism or anything, it's very interesting to see how those people are very hard to have conversations with, because they're very good at regurgitating information. There's the key points, but to actually have an open-minded conversation becomes very difficult, and it's a very tricky thing, and it's very hard to avoid. You see it affecting so many people in our in our culture right now.
Well, the pandemic was just the absolute bomb of that situation.
Oh yeah,
that was the nuclear bomb.
It pulled the curtains back pretty quick.
It did. It has woken a lot of people up. So there's the yin and the yang. One becomes the other, right? The darkness gives birth to the light, and I think that's why my podcast is so important, because I'm really trying to shine some light into the dark and plant some seeds of higher consciousness. I'd love it. Maybe you can tell us about the process of starting and developing your farm, what your farm produces, and what you think people should know about starting their own farm. You did tell us a lot about it, but commercial farms are probably the biggest waster of water of any industry there is. And not only that, they're poisoning the water supply of the entire planet. When you look at the science of water has an almost infinite capacity for memory, and it remembers the energetic signature of anything that comes into contact with it. Research in homeopathy shows beyond a shadow of a doubt that even if not a single molecule of a substance, call it a pesticide, remains in the water, you can for example, you can take water that's been exposed to pesticides, you can remove every molecule of the pesticide and then water other plants with it, and it will affect the plant exactly as though the pesticide is in there, because the energetic signature still exists in the water. So the plant can't tell the difference between the energetic signature and the actual molecule. We not only have a dangerous situation due to farming and industry with how it impacts the water worldwide, because the hydrological cycle takes, the good news is it takes water from Jake's farm and spreads it all over the world too, which is another reason for us to start a lot of small farms where we really take care of water and earth, because the water carries the energy and information of holism and health and vitality, just like it carries the information of toxicity, poison, and death.
Absolutely. Water responds. First of all, water is miraculous. Water predates our planet.
Yes.
To start with. It all came here. It's not like it was created here. So here we are on this planet, so fortunate to have this substance which essentially creates life. As far as we know, the biology that we know of, you cannot have life without water. As a culture right now, I don't think we understand how incredibly valuable water is. People are starting to realize people are starting to read more articles about drought in the West and desertification and global warming, all this stuff, that people are starting to think about water and think about those things. But, the thing about water is that when managed properly, when worked with, when observed, when listened to, when spoken to, when utilized with intention, wow, it's amazing what it does. It is just incredible. And the way that we have worked with water here, we tried to go back to the basics with it. How far back can I go to look at the original way that water would have been managed here on this continent? How far back can I go? What's the most trusted source I can find for water management? And I found beavers. Beavers are the OG water management team. I've also been, when it comes to working with water, I've been heavily inspired by Mark Shepard. I don't know how familiar you are with his work. He's out of Wisconsin and has done incredible work with water management systems, swales and ponds, and reinvigorating entire landscapes, utilizing water management systems, which is what my system is essentially based on, was inspired by his techniques. That combined with adapting his techniques, because we're not in Wisconsin, we're in the high desert up here in Colorado. I've essentially adapted kind of the Mark Shepard approach on water management for trying to look at it through a beaver's eyes in the high Rockies, in the Rocky Mountains. The thing about beavers is what they would do is they'd work the high country and the low country as well. But what they would do in the high country that was most inspiring to me is they would dam up that water. They'd make their beaver dams using softwood riparian trees, coppice trees that would then sprout right back. And they would create these long, systems of water retention. It wasn't just like a beaver pond here and a beaver pond there. As the water would rise, it would find somewhere else to spill over, and they would patch that up. And so then it would find somewhere else to spill over, and they would patch that up. It would find somewhere else to spill over. They would patch that up. And all of a sudden, you could have miles of these retention dams that would be holding water in the high country. And what that would be doing would be forcing that water to soak down into the soil and down and replenishing the hydrology of the entire landscape. When ranchers and farmers started really utilizing agriculture in the West, one of the first things that was done, which seemed logical at the time, was break up all those beaver dams so that the water gets to your farm. It's all being held up there, right?
Yeah.
Thing is, back then, there would have been springs and perennial flowing creeks coming off the mountains all the time, because the way that retention would work is it would soak the water into the soil. It would hydrate the entire hydrology of the landscape, and then they would essentially spring feed perennial flows on all of these drainages that would always be flowing. Slow, consistent, but filtered by the earth.
Yes.
Beautiful, constant flow. That was the West. That was the water moving from the Rockies out to the Pacific. Now, with all the beaver dams broken up, when we get a big snowmelt or thunderheads on the mountains, what's happening instead is a fast surface runoff. Instead of that water being caught and held on contour by beaver dams, that water is rushing down at very high speeds. It's eroding, it's taking the soil with it. And what you're getting downstream is a fast and furious, muddy
silt pile,
whole bunch of water all at once.
Yeah.
And then it goes dry again. And then there's no water.
And there's no land cover to keep the land cool.
It's there's all of that too. And there's the fact that what we've done instead, we've built reservoirs for irrigation that fill from the runoff and then are slowly fed out. But even on a bad year, those reservoirs go dry. The way the Beavers had it engineered in the high country was a guaranteed flow downstream all year.
Yeah.
And even during droughts, there'd be enough, the biological sponge of all that water being held in the high country, it would still flow through droughts. And that really inspired me. And so I tried to recreate that on my farm. I started at the highest point of the drainage on my farm I could, and I built essentially a beaver analog dam. The drainage that would run through my farm, I get what's called tailings. So when people upstream of me would irrigate hay fields or, pasture, the water would run through that drainage, and it was in the deepest spots, it was almost 20 feet deep.
Wow.
It had been chiseling away at it for decades and decades, making it deeper and deeper. And then when they would stop irrigating, it would go totally dry. So I thought, well, this is a good experiment. This is a good place to start. I put in a bunch of ponds, started at the top, worked my way down to use all the tailings coming off, that irrigation. What the ponds also do is mimicking those beaver dams of the high country. Some of them are designed to actually spread that water out onto contour and soak it in more onto the ridges. And what I'm using for that is called a swale. It's a ditch and a berm on the downhill side.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't flow like a ditch. It more just fills. So gently without erosion, which is very different than a ditch, which just flows.
Yeah.
So I put this system in and essentially watched as my land became hydrated again, and catching that water and soaking it in across the landscape, it within 2 years created a perennial flow in my stream.
That's
in
amazing.
My drainage. So we went from having essentially an eroded deep ravine of a creek bed that would flow hard and stop, to now having a gently, beautifully flowing stream every day of the year.
Awesome.
And when my pond at the top of the farm goes totally dry because there's no water coming in at the top, my creek still flows. And it's done that through entire drought seasons.
Beautiful.
Just to show the power of what those beavers were doing on a massive scale across the entire Rocky Mountains and across the Cascades and across the Sierras, what these beavers were doing. What I'm doing it on 40 acres and achieved a result. Imagine if we were doing this on millions of acres.
Yes.
The West would green. We would literally reverse desertification through that one adjustment right there.
Be the Garden of Eden.
It would be major. That combined with, and that's the other aspect of the farm that comes in next, is the other keystone species that I get inspiration from would be bison. The American bison would have been fully adapted to that system here in the West, that those perennial flows, those springs, and the grasslands that would have been created. And so the way that the bison would have moved across the landscape would have also been a force of buffering against drought. And this is where a lot of people have misconceptions about cattle, is that cattle are bad. Cattle are overgrazing the planet. Cattle are causing warming, all this stuff.
Yeah.
Actually, we can flip that and say, when managed properly, and if we mimic the keystone species that would have originally been here, we can use it to reverse desertification, sequester carbon, create more water retention, and essentially fertilize and stimulate the grasses that are actually adapted for our region here. When we remove the bison, everything goes into a downward spiral, because the grasses that are adapted for that heavy mob grazing, those bison herds, they actually can't survive without those bison. And I'm not suggesting bringing the bison back in those full numbers. We have like highways and stuff now. Like it literally wouldn't work to drop 30 to 60 million bison just and let them free range the West. We couldn't handle it.
No.
But what we can do is run cattle in a way that mimics the way that bison would have moved. And that's what I've been doing on my farm. And I attribute the way my farm looks now and to the productivity of my farm to the fact that we've mimicked the beavers for the water management and repaired our hydrology. And then we've also repaired our soil and biodiversity and grasses utilizing cattle. The combination, the beaver and the bison, something about it, it just clicks here. It's basically turned everything on. Where we had just alkaline clay and I couldn't hardly get anything to grow in it, we have black soil now.
It's great.
And it's not from adding compost or bringing in inputs. It's from essentially managing water and managing cattle.
Well, the microorganisms in the manure of the animals is going to regenerate the life in the soil, and then the microorganisms do all their alchemy on the soil.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the more you study soil science, real soil science, the more mind blowing it is. I mean, the things that microorganisms can do is freaking crazy stuff. Have you ever heard of the documentary "One Man, One World, One Cow"?
I've not.
Oh, you would love that. Just search that on Netflix or Amazon or even the general internet search. It's a fantastic documentary. One Man, One World, One Cow.
Okay.
The thing that I wanted to ask you is, what do you think the effect was? Because through the probably mid 1600s through 1800s, right up to 1900, as white man came west and went into all the Indian territories, they were killing the shit out of the beaver. You had all these huge trapping companies. I mean, they just extracted the beavers to the point that there was none left. Mm-hmm. So when you look at the documentary, I saw a documentary on Yellowstone and what happened when they put the wolf back in and how it changed water flows and plant and tree species and all sorts of stuff. I'm wondering what you think the impact of wiping out so many beaver must have been to the natural ecosystems even back then.
It would have been enormous. It would have been enormous. And then the tricky thing with destroying an ecosystem is that you can't just put it back together super easily. We have all these incredibly complicated relationships between these keystone species and the plant species. And there's so much context between the relationship between all of these players. And that's why it's so easy to take it apart. It is so hard to put back together.
Yeah.
And when putting it back together, which is essentially what we're attempting to do, not just here, but we work with clients all over the place, working with landowners and farmers who are trying to repair ecology through essentially regenerative agriculture. What we're trying to do is put it back together, but in a way that makes sense in context for where we're at today, too. It's a different world now. You can't just bring beavers and wolves and bison back anywhere. For one, it wouldn't be legal. And for two, you would have all kinds of issues. In Colorado, we recently released wolves into the mountains. It was a big controversial thing. It ended up being a total failure. And one of the reasons is because it was not a context-based choice. We didn't take into account the fact that when the wolves would have had a very high population in Colorado and been assimilated into the ecology of Colorado, there would have been massive herds of bison. There would have been beavers in the high country. We would have been looking at a wild land, and they would have had their needs met. Today, the only thing those wolves really had to prey upon, other than some elk herds, would have been people's cattle.
Right.
The whole state is pretty much fenced. It's a different world now.
Yeah. It's complicated.
It's extremely complicated. It's simple concepts, but the relationships are complicated. And that's why one of the main things we do when we do a system like my own farm, for example, people ask, like, what do you do? And like, one of the main things we do is we observe. We just observe it. We make adjustments and we observe the response. And if we're getting positive response, positive feedback, we go down that road. And if we're seeing results that we don't like or that are negatively affecting other aspects of the operation, then we have to adjust. This is so different than the approach of conventional ag, of course, where you just impose a crop on a landscape. You say, we're going to make this crop work here no matter what, whatever we got to get out of here, however we got to adjust the soil, whatever we got to do to make this crop work here. Let's nuke it and adjust it and get it to work. The approach we're taking is like constantly taking feedback from our actions and adjusting our crops to be harmonious with the ecology.
Hi, everybody. I'm sure you've heard me bragging about Paleo Valley over the years of listening to my podcast, and there's a very good reason for that. Not only do I love the genius of Autumn Smith, a holistic nutritionist, but her products are phenomenally good. My kids love them, I love them, and we all use them every day. My students love them, my clients love them, and they are absolutely top notch. One of my kids' favorite snacks is Paleo Valley's bone broth in chocolate. They love to make their hot chocolate drink themselves simply by whisking up collagen-rich protein powder in a mug of hot water. And I'm happy to let them indulge, as I know it is packed full of great nutrition for them in the disguise of a sweet treat. Even us big kids love our sweet treats, and isn't it great when we can enjoy something that not only tastes great, but is truly great for us? Paleo Valley's 100% grass-fed bone broth protein is the only of its kind made from truly grass-fed cows raised on pesticide-free grass pastures. It's made from bones, not hides, slowly simmered to extract the proteins and nutrients. Gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free, and dairy-free. The chocolate mix includes organic coconut milk powder, organic cacao bean, organic monk fruit that makes a sweet, creamy, delicious drink that my kids, family, and friends just can't get enough of. You can also add to smoothies, use it in baking, or mix it with your coffee for a healthy mocha treat. Paleo Valley's bone broth protein is also available in vanilla and unflavored. To try Paleo Valley's excellent bone broth protein and save 15% on your purchase, go to paleovalley.com/lowercase CHEK15. No promo is required. That's PALEOVALLEY.com/CHEK15 to get your 15% discount as a Living 4D listener. No promo code is required, and I promise you, not only will you love this stuff, your kids will love it. You can giggle and laugh because they think they're getting a sweet dessert right before bed, but they will love it and sleep great. And boy, do we parents love it when our kids sleep great. Enjoy Paleo Valley's amazing products. One of the problems I see is that even in university farming programs, agricultural degree programs, and in general, they don't see the bioelectrical relationship between the sun, the atmosphere, and the earth. And they don't understand, for example, Arden Anderson in his book, The Science of Agriculture, or I think it's either Science of or Science and, I think it's Science in Agriculture. Arden B. Excellent, phenomenal book. But he shows, for example, that the microorganisms will actually take the humus of the soil and shape it into cosmic antennas. So all through the soil, you've got these antennas that catch sunlight and starlight, and they capture that energy, and they use it to actually basically electrify to energize the soil. And so the soil becomes the sort of the catch basin for light and energy, but that the plants and trees follow the electrical lines of energy toward the sun, and then the magnetic field goes perpendicular across the surface of the earth. And he shows with really good diagrams and explanations how the whole farming system is an electromagnetic system, but the conductivity of it is really dependent upon the health of the microorganisms, because they're regulating capacitance, resistance, kind of like soil engineers. And
Oh yeah.
people think of, like, they don't think of the bioelectrical aspects of it. They might think of the light. They might think of chemical inputs like fertilizers or anti-pest things for herbicides, fungicides, pesticides, rodenticides. They might use Roundup, which is a disaster, as you know, but they don't actually see the living relationship and the electromagnetic relationship. And what's the meridian lines on a human being's body, the flows of life force energy, which is bioelectricity. And then you have chakras all over the world, and Schauberger and many others show this. Steiner shows this. You have fault lines, you got Curry lines, you got all these different energy systems of the earth that people are unconscious of how to work with, but the Egyptians knew how to do it. The people that built the pyramids built these pyramids right on key energy lines in the earth. I mean, we've got tons of evidence. Stonehenge. The people that lived on this planet long before we did we're very, very aware of the bioelectrical relationships on this planet. And to the degree we've ignored the electromagnetic relationships, we've compensated by trying to do it with chemicals. And you cannot use a chemical to replace the natural interaction of a bioelectrical circuit between the sun and the earth. It just won't work. It's the difference between being in the sun every day and trying to take vitamin D supplements to compensate. No matter how much vitamin D you take, it is not the sun, and it is
not the same.
The sad thing for me is I've got a library full of just mind-blowingly good books, but these things don't make it into the hands of university students and agricultural programs. They don't make it into the mainstream public. Instead, the whole media and education system's bought and paid for. And the same way the medical system, 60% of a medical doctor's education is paid for by drug companies. So they don't really learn how to practice medicine. The average medical doctor only gets 4 hours of nutrition training in 4 to 7 years in school, but they don't really know anything about what makes life. They just know about how to chase symptoms. And so we've got an agricultural system that's really just like a mirror image of our medical system. And you can't deny the fact that the United States has the most expensive medical system in the world and ranks something like, I don't know, last time I looked, it was 67th or something like that for effectiveness. I mean, that's just completely, utterly stupid. It's like, okay, how long do we have to wait before we say, okay, we're pissing a lot of money away on something that's not only not working, it's making us worse, because 20 years ago, we were ranked 37th in the world for medicine. Now we're down into the 60s and falling every year. But people keep doing it, right? And doctors keep doing it. They don't ask questions. And that's exactly what it means to be indoctrinated. That is the cult. That is the brainwashing. And that is what people need to be very conscious of, because if you watch too many television commercials and too much social media and get onto the wrong podcast, you just get deeper and deeper into the cult. You don't even know you're being indoctrinated into this cult.
Right. And at the heart of it all, one of the things I see happening is that there's such a lack of these days, a lack of accountability, not just in the people producing the food, the people who are in healthcare. There's no accountability. There's also very little accountability, it seems like, in people themselves. It's not encouraged to go do your own research, to seek out healthier options, to seek out alternative lifestyles that are going to expose you to more sunlight and more soil and more cleaner water. These are things that I feel like are not valued highly enough in our culture. It's when we talk about the health issues in our culture, I mean, to me, it is so simple to trace it to the fact that it's like, being somebody who raises animals, it's very easy to look at things like that and say, well, is the water clean?
Yeah.
Well, are they living in a soiled environment, or are they living in a clean environment? Because that's a big deal too. And what kind of food do they have access to? Oh, are they eating feed that was exposed to heavy chemical load? These are things as a farmer that you get to know. If your animals are being exposed to dirty water, high chemical loads, soiled environments, they're going to start showing symptoms of being extremely unhealthy.
Yeah.
And a lot of the things that start to show are trouble with reproductivity.
Parasite infections.
Parasite infections are a big one. And then on the flip side, if they've got access to clean water, if they have access to fresh pasture and they're not living in their own shit, and if you're careful not to feed them grain that's essentially overloaded with chemicals, all of a sudden, you don't need a vet anymore. Your animals are healthy. And as an example, my dairy cows, in a commercial dairy, how long do you think a dairy cow lives before it gets cold?
Not very long. A year, maybe?
Yeah. No, they can go 4 years, maybe 5 years. Occasionally they've got an old girl they keep around, but in general, you get 3 or 4 lactations before you're really they're skin and bones and they're maxed out. And that's based on how much they're milked, so much nutrition and vitality being pulled out of them every day, and then B, the environment. Our cows, healthy, well-maintained dairy cows who are, treated with respect, you get 20 plus years of a relationship with that milk cow. So, and that's with almost no health issues.
Yeah.
Like nothing. So sometimes people will say like everything that's said to you, you bring it back to animals or farming or something. And it's like true because that's my reference point. But like when we talk about human health and environment and all that stuff, it's to me, it's just clear as day when we compare it to farm animals because it's such a controlled environment where you have such visibility and transparency over everything that they're getting. You can see the direct results.
Yes. I in my studies of soil science and parasites, because I've had to deal with countless cases of human beings having parasites in my clinical practice. And so I put a program together called Healing Fungal and Parasite Infections, the Absolute Essentials. And I go into quite a lot of depth of what parasites are, how they function symbiotically in nature with animals and human beings, and what the difference is between parasites in your body and a parasite infection, because you can't be a healthy person with no parasites in your body. We are a symbiotic system, just like nature. Most people don't realize of the 100 trillion cells that make up the human body, based on some research estimates, 90% of them are non-human. They're bacteria, viruses, fungi, and parasites. Even our mitochondria are actually parasitic organisms. People like Carrie Reams, Arden Anderson, and even Phil Callahan, who I consulted with years ago. If you're not familiar with Phil Callahan's books, they're amazing. Philip Callahan, he was the first scientist to really give a scientific demonstration of paramagnetic energy and demonstrate that the sun during solar flares was so powerful it could split photons into two, where one would be a paramagnetic pole and the other would be, so it produced monopole photons, which they didn't know was possible. One would be paramagnetic and the other diamagnetic. But anyhow, he would show the relationship between the paramagnetic energies in the soil, and did research all over the world showing all sorts of stuff that I won't go into because it'll sidetrack us too much. But the thing that, from consulting and studying all these books and then consulting Callahan, they all said the same thing. You can't get rid of parasites in animals unless you balance the soils. You have to make sure the soils are healthy, the microorganisms are healthy, the mineral balance is just right. And the mineral balance in the soil is the key thing for producing the electrical effect of the soil. And that's the paramagnetic diamagnetic balance is so essential in there. For those listening, paramagnetic energy has an affinity to the south pole of a magnet, and diamagnetic has an affinity to the north pole of a magnet. And all the water and tissue of your body is diamagnetic, but the oxygen you breathe is the highest paramagnetic substance there is. So just to show you how the body works like the soil, just like you have to have oxygen in soil for it to be healthy and vital. This is why impacted soil won't grow plants. It can't breathe. But when you take a breath of air, the oxygen is attached to the heme molecules, the iron molecules in your blood. And then those molecules of oxygen are delivered into a cell that's bathed in water. So you have a positive charge in a paramagnetic positive charge in the oxygen into a negative water-based environment, and that creates a living battery. And that's really the basis of one of the key bases of the electromagnetic functions of the soil. Are you familiar, by the way, it just rose into my mind. I wanted to share this with you and others in case you're not familiar. Are you familiar with the website Acres USA?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because that's a great place for a lot of books and videos and things like that. A great video to show how smart cows are, if those of you listening haven't seen it, is called The Other Side of the Fence. And it shows how are you familiar with that video?
I'm not, but I'm very familiar with Acres. In fact, Mark Shepard, who I was telling you about, is very heavily involved with them.
Yeah, I think I might have seen his name listed there or some articles by him. Now that you mention it, but you'd love the video, The Other Side of the Fence. It's an old one, but but the truth still stands. What they did is they took cows and they put them on pastures that were commercially farmed, that were right next to organically farmed pastures and grasses. And the cows would not eat any of the food on the commercially farmed, none of the commercially farmed grass. They wouldn't touch it. They would stick their heads through the fences and destroy the fences trying to get to all the grass. And they would eat all the way around the fence line until there was no grass. Then they would eat what they had no choice to eat. And every time the cows were smart enough to know not to eat the poison grasses, they would destroy the fences trying to get to the good grass.
Cows are, when it comes to cows and eating, they are incredibly precise tools. Anybody who says cows are dumb haven't watched a cow from ground level. It's so interesting. If you think about a cow, it's a big animal, right?
Yeah.
Big old legs, big wide belly, big neck. But where do they see the world from?
The ground.
The ground level.
Yeah.
Their muzzle is right there on that forage, and their eyes are just right there above the ground. And that's where they actually kind of operate from in a lot of ways when it comes to foraging.
Yeah.
And if you get down there with them and watch, they're not just boom, munching. They are, it's like watching like a Japanese person with chopsticks.
Yeah.
They are extremely precise about every single thing that they consume, to the point where there could be a grass clump with one weed in it that maybe is a noxious weed they don't want. And I mean, it look just the way they handle it. They handle every situation differently. They approach it with finesse, and they're so incredibly good at sorting forages at ground level rapidly while they're eating. That being said, it's also been fun to train my cows over the years to be less picky eaters and teach them to eat almost everything except for the really poisonous weeds.
Yeah.
But they, if they've got a total abundance in front of them and they can be picky and choose what they want, it is so fun to watch them and how, see what flavors they're after, what nutrition they're after. And so when it comes to a chemically treated field, which I'm sure was also a lot of the time they'll treat it with herbicide and get rid of all the weeds and a lot of the diversity. So it'd be just a few species in there, whether it's
Yeah.
alfalfa and a couple of grass species. When they're on a diverse organic pasture with so much variety in forage, it's amazing to see how excited they get.
One of the books in my library, I can't remember the author's name, but I remember the title. It's called Soil, Grass, and Cancer. And it's all about the relationship between cancer that shows up in cows and the soil and the grass. But I think it was that book. But one of my books said that cows have 35,000 taste buds per square centimeter, and human beings only have about 5,000 per square centimeter. So they were showing that cows can taste with a far higher degree of accuracy for minerals, for all the nutritional factors in grass. So they have this level of discernment that a human being can't even begin to imagine. It's kind of like the difference between a dog's nose and our nose,
Mm-hmm. And they teach each other. They teach each other what's good and what's not. The more generations of cattle that you run in a region, the more savvy they get and adapted they get. They teach their offspring like what's good, what's at what time of year, and what plants to avoid at different times of year. And fascinating to watch their relationship with the forage and how those forages have all evolved alongside them in a way.
Yeah, it's really amazing. Well, I'm going to give you one more question here before I break the podcast. We now have major corporate influences like Bill Gates, the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, government agencies, and others convincing the public that cattle farming and animal farming in general is a major contributor to global warming. We also have university programs teaching this so-called scientific fact in quotes. There are some very sinister corporate agendas being pushed in this regard, and I feel it is simply a ploy to wipe out small farmers, to eliminate the competition, keep people dependent on the foods that corporations provide, and to grab land to support their various agendas and more. I'd love it if you can share your thoughts in this regard, because I think these things are really serious and are way too people are way blind to what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
When you look, for example, at Bill Gates is now the largest owner of farmland. He tried to pass legislation starting in the state of Oregon to make it illegal to farm animals, and he has plans to try to do that across the United States. I mean, all of this shit's for profit. And if people haven't read the book Oneness versus the 1% by Vandana Shiva, that is a very, very powerful expose of Bill Gates and what he's already done in India and how devastating his escapades have been and how dangerous he is and his ideas are. One of the big things, of course, is, cattle ranching and greenhouse gases and all this carbon taxing and bullshit. I just, because you're in this game for a living, I just wanted to hear your thoughts on this, because I think people need to really hear it from someone that lives this life.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there across all of that, of course. But
fire away.
Yeah, people who are running cattle the way that I'm running cattle, we are environmentalists first. We are looking at soil health first. The beef itself is somewhat of a byproduct of improving an overall ecosystem. So, and I know that's not the same on a feedlot and in different operations, but just to clarify, because there are a lot of different types of people running cattle and a lot of different cattle operations and techniques being utilized. If you are running cattle regeneratively, if you are running them rotationally grazing, if you are seeking biodiversity, seeking to build soil, seeking to, improve water retention, all the good things that cattle can do and managed properly, it's just a cherry on top that they happen to also be covered in beef and
Yeah.
that we can sell it. And it happens to be a superfood when it's raised that way, happens to
Yes.
be incredibly nutritionally dense and pretty much unbeatable when it comes to, something that is good for us. There's that aspect of it. Then we can talk about overall the push, the assault against cattle. It's important to remember that cows are, first of all, a natural force of nature. I feel like people somehow have removed them
Yeah.
from that. They have been here on this planet in various forms for eons, and we have, as humans, been lucky enough to engage in a relationship with them. Our ancestors were so incredibly advanced, so much more thoughtful than we could ever imagine. The fact that they would put in that effort to creating this beautiful reciprocal relationship with these large and at that time very ornery animals that
Mm.
would have been difficult to work with, difficult to create trust with. They, through whatever technologies they had and spiritual relationships they had, were able to convince pretty much across all these continents. Maybe not in North America. The bison, from what I understand, was never really domesticated, but you have in India and in Africa, in Europe. This relationship was formed that would change humans and change bovines forever.
Yes.
And it
Kind of
was
like man and dog, similar parallel.
similar to man and dog. What did we offer the cows? People always think about our relationship with cattle as extractive. So let's think about it. What did we have to offer? Why would these cows be willing? Why would these animals, as an entire group, basically be willing to go along with us? At that time, they were being just slaughtered by saber-toothed tigers, and they would be dying off in mass numbers in the wintertime because of lack of forage. They would be suffering heavily from parasites at times. They would be, they were assimilated in nature, but nature didn't give a shit about them. They were constantly being assaulted. That's how it is being in a natural system in a way for herd animals.
Well, death feeds the soil. I mean, people forget that.
Exactly. And everything about their existence was there in harmony, but they were also being constantly assaulted, and their survival was not guaranteed. What humans offered those animals was, we offered them shelter. The ability, come into our shelter, we'll protect you from those carnivores. We'll protect you from the natural elements. We'll literally work with forages and keep forage dry and nutritionally good throughout cold winter months. We will provide for you all these things, and we will also obviously be taking. It's a reciprocal relationship. The difference now is that instead of the cows being basically just hounded by wolves and saber-toothed tigers and it being a free-for-all, now we are selectively culling, the excess males from the herd. So if you're a healthy heifer, a cow that has a calf every year, that you keep on going and you're actually provided for. If you're a male, and we already selected the best males, because as humans we have that ability
Yeah.
to select the males that have the best looking postures and the best intelligence and the ones that pass on the best genetics to the next generation. We started interacting with cattle on that level, and we took their population to a new level. We helped them as a population excel through management and culling. And, we basically as a culture began to subsist on the flesh, the milk, the leather,
Yeah.
and the bones. Everything about these animals became
Useful.
not just useful, imperative to our survival at a point.
Yeah.
And in return, these cattle became better off than ever. So we have this ancient reciprocal relationship with them. You think about oxen, and they would be pulling things for us too in the field.
Right. Yeah.
So now here we are today, and what has shifted? Our relationship with these animals has, in some ways, we've done them we've done amazing for them. We've brought their populations through the roof. We've brought them to every continent on Earth pretty much. We've helped their genetics improve. But now it's like through this way that we're raising them on feedlots and the way that we're, using them in a different form than ever before. Now we seem to be disrespecting them.
Yes, and making them very sedentary and sick.
And stupid.
Well, the holiday season is already upon us, and I don't know about you, but I'm already feeling a little bit overwhelmed. With all the demands of the end-of-year tasks for the businesses, holiday preparations, gift shopping, and all the family get-togethers, it can all be a little bit too much and a big source of stress. Well, that's why I'm here to tell you about Stress Guardian, because this is the latest scientific breakthrough from Bioptimizers, which, as you know, if you're a regular listener of Paul's podcast, is the company that makes some of his favorite and must-have supplements. Stress Guardian is packed with a blend of 14 adaptogenic herbs to help you regulate your stress response naturally, and so giving you some more control over your holiday stress. With daily use, Stress Guardian becomes your personal shield against seasonal tension, enhancing both your mental and physical well-being. So say goodbye to just surviving and this holiday season thrive with Stress Guardian. To get a head start on reducing your holiday stress, visit bioptimizers.com/living4D and use the promo code PAUL10 for 10% off your first order. That's bioptimizers.com/living4D and the promo code is PAUL10. By the way, Bioptimizers is so confident in their products that they offer a risk-free 365-day money-back guarantee. So you absolutely can't go wrong. And I highly recommend that you try Stress Guardian today.
We have a God knows how long relationship of shepherds protecting and leading cows, and the shepherds often led the cows to grasslands that they may not have ever found on their own because, we were nomadic for so long. So we would be out hunting animals and moving all the time and then find a bunch of cows. And then if it became short on food or they'd ate the area out, the shepherds would guide them to other valleys and pastures. So we kind of became the, shall we say, the cerebral cortex of the cow.
100%. And in my opinion, just like how the grasslands can't actually survive without that animal impact, I don't think we would survive as humanity without these complicated relationships we've created and evolved alongside for tens of thousands of years. There's no other, in my opinion, just like you were talking about sunlight versus vitamin D supplements, you can't replicate our complex relationship with cows in a lab. You can't 3D print a steak.
No.
And it's not, and consider it to be the same thing. When we eat food, it's not just food in mouth and then extract nutrients and shit it out. It's a relationship that goes back to the soil and goes back to the living organisms involved. And there's not just a nutrient exchange, there's an energetic exchange.
Yeah, and an information exchange. People forget everything we eat is information. Based on science, there's only three things that create the entire universe and everything in it: energy, information, and frequency. And people keep thinking of food just as calories, which is so dry and dangerous. Food is energy, food is information, and food is frequency. And so when we're eating, for example, one of your cows, we're eating the water. I mean, even cattle is a piece of steak, still about 70% water. And the water is carrying all the information from the environment. So you're eating the, shall we say, the energetic imprint of the environment so that your genetics know how to interface with that environment. That's very important epigenetic information. We're eating the frequency of the animal, which is literally a form of energy input. Just like, if you were to change the frequency of sunlight too much, it would damage you. It wouldn't help you.
Right.
Just like if you go to England and plug your razor in, and it's an American razor, it'll fry it because it's not designed to run on 240 volts or 220, or I think 240 they run over there. And I accidentally did that once. It lasted about 3 seconds and it was smoking. But if we realize that everything that we eat and is harmonious with our body has to come from the animals that are not only coherent with our genetic needs, but with our needs as a living organism. And we need quality soil. We need quality water. We need sunlight in different colors because those colors are different frequencies. Mm-hmm. And so you see that when we're eating foods that are of a variety of different colors. And for example, I saw research a few years back that was shocking. It said the average person in the world today only eats 10 to 12 foods their entire lifetime.
Wow.
I'm like, wow, that is such a narrow spectrum of energy and information on a, when you've got a complex system of systems. The human body is a cybernetic system, which is a system of systems. And just like if you have any system, you don't have the same circuitry in one system that's in another system, or it would be the same system. So our liver has certain nutritional needs and certain light needs and certain energetic needs and frequency needs. And our kidneys have different needs, and our lungs have different needs, and our brain has different needs, and our muscles have different needs, and our sex organs. And to make sperm or eggs, we have to have the right nutrition and the right energy and the right information, the right frequency. But if you think now of what we're doing when we're throwing in these chemical inputs and we're poisoning the water, and we're filling these animals full of dangerous synthetic medical drugs and mRNA vaccines, and then we're eating all that, it's completely and utterly obliterating the integrity and the harmony of our internal biological systems, and therefore our ability to interface with the external environment, because the two are mirroring each other. I was going to bring this up later, but right now is a good time to mention it to try to really help my students understand this concept. I created a concept called the ECHO, ECHO, energy, chemistry, hydration, organisms. And I showed that in order for water to be healthy, it has to be in the right energetic environment. It has to be healthy enough for us to use it as water or for anything to hydrate with it. So it has to have the right chemistry or it won't support life. And it has to have the right living organisms. Living water is full of life. It's not dead stuff. What I show my students is that there's a pendular swing. Whatever you do to the environment, and if you manipulate the energy, chemistry, hydration, or the organisms, it'll affect you, and it'll change the energy, chemistry, hydration, and organisms of your body. And then that'll change the way you think, feel, emote, and relate, and perceive. And so if you keep distorting the echo within the human body, not realizing it's because you're damaging the very milieu in which it lives and breathes and sustains itself, what you see is each swing of the pendulum is a degradation. You damage the environment. You damage the perceptual, psychological, physiological, mental, emotional faculties of the human being. Its perception becomes distorted. It gets more reliant on high-speed, fix it now, laboratory-based, synthetic-based inputs. And then we go do more of that to the environment. And we start
it's a feedback loop.
It's a total feedback loop.
Yeah.
But without positive feedback and positive adjustment, it'll do exactly what we've been talking about. You'll desertify the soil. You'll poison everything, including yourself. And then you'll run to medical doctors who will use the exact same approach that destroyed the damn land and the animals and destroy you further. And so where are we today? We got the most expensive medical system in the world. The average American spending just under $15,000 a year on medical drugs and doctor's visits. That's a lot of organic food. That's a lot of free-range food for a family.
Oh, yeah.
And like we are really like so unconscious about the fact that we are not investing in our children's future, our ecosystem's future. We are taking from Peter to pay Paul and using Band-Aid technologies all the way. We're seeing the effects of that. The question is, are we going to wake up and listen to people like you who demonstrate that it can be done? Because there's a certain point, like if you wait too long, then the rehabilitation time is long enough that you may not survive the process of waiting to regenerate the land.
Which is interesting because it almost brings up another opportunity, the interesting thing, and to bring this also back around to Bill Gates, when you think about his tactics of buying farmland, he's been buying a shit ton of land in Africa. And
Yeah.
if you think about why, it's because a lot of the land he's purchasing there hasn't already been under conventional ag. It's like virgin soil. And what's happening is when our soils on this continent are fully degraded essentially through our practices, he's going to be sitting pretty on all this virgin soil to then essentially degrade over there.
Well, he'll destroy it.
Yeah, when what we as regenerative farmers are doing, we're looking for opportunities to get in on degraded land because, for one, a lot of us can't afford to go and buy prime farmland, prime agricultural land. What we're doing, like what I did on this piece of land here, we're being opportunistic. We're buying old overgrazed ranches. We're buying old cropped out land that can't really support one more corn crop without so many inputs it would no longer be worthwhile. Those are stuff that's been clear cut. These are the pieces of land that are the opportunities for especially young farmers who are operating on a budget. There's very little, or I'll say this, there's no land on earth that can't be worked with. We can work with all of it. It's just how much work is it going to be? And in my experience, when we start with water and we start with basic agroforestry techniques and we start with basic rotational grazing techniques, nothing fancy, we see rapid regeneration. And if people like Bill Gates are going to leave a trail of desertification and chemically poisoned land behind them, while they go and do their thing and make their profit, they're going to leave behind them a trail of opportunity for young regenerative farmers. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but if you think about it, those are the landscapes that are going to be needing to be rapidly repaired. And once they're being taken care of properly, in my opinion, will produce better quality food and more calorically valuable food and more alive food than the conventional farming that destroyed it ever could have. So, yeah, there's going to be a point where conventional farming puts itself out of business.
Yeah, I agree. There's one thing I want to put on the table, though, before we close out the public section of the podcast. I imagine you've heard the term forever chemicals.
Yeah.
Because I think, if I remember right, Roundup takes 75 years to decompose in the soil. And there's a number of chemicals that take 75 or more years to decompose. Mm-hmm. So there's always this real problem. Like when we were looking for 5 years for our home and land, which we finally found. We live on a 14-acre property and we have orchards, and we built it up, and we have some pigs and some 7 goats and 15 chickens, and so we're building up slowly and progressively because we're all so busy. We can only spend so much time farming, and it takes a lot of work to do all this stuff. But even though people like you can take that land and do a lot of magic things with it, we still have this really serious issue of these forever chemicals. And that's where I think we need these young geniuses. I mean, instead of going into a lab and making LSD and those kinds of chemicals, we've got to inspire young geniuses to go into the labs and figure out how to breed microorganisms and do other things that can neutralize and catabolize and metabolize a lot of these chemicals, just like they have bacteria they can put in the oceans that'll eat up oil spills. We really need some, funding and some rewards for kids and people to come up with solutions for these forever chemicals. I was just reading Children's Health Defense the other day, and I almost shit myself when I saw an article showing that Monsanto had just been approved to release a new chemical that was something like 75 to 90 times more toxic than Roundup. I'm like, what in the fuck is going on?
Yeah, no, it's
crazy.
It's really bad. There's really, really toxic shit in the environment right now. The thing is about it, and it's actually kind of depressing, is it's there. It's there, and the only way at this point to deal with it is to start with the basics, which is full ecosystem rejuvenation, and then observing what techniques are showing the fastest results for disassembling those incredibly harmful chemicals. So, for example, let's say we've got a certain amount of acreage that was cropped in corn, soy, wheat rotation, and it's got heavy Roundup built up in the soil, and it's totally trashed. And we go into that knowing it. Well, we can run one study that says how long does it take to break down if you do nothing, which is probably what most of the studies are on.
Mm-hmm.
And that I would agree would probably be 75 plus years. We can do another plot where we say we're going to put this one into a heavy perennial agroforestry system. We could try hazelnuts, chestnuts, walnuts, oaks, hickories, hardwoods. We can also do areas in like softwood trees, willows and poplars, which grow really fast and could probably, we could see how they interact with it. We could be chipping them and putting down wood chips thick and seeing how the microorganisms and mycorrhizae and different fungi would be starting to interact with those chemicals and be monitoring that. That would be one plot. We could be heavily mob grazing and just see what the cattle do on it.
Yeah.
If you're running cows properly, just seeing what the cows' interaction with that grassland and with the rejuvenation of the soil, what that interaction does to the breakdown of those chemicals. And then we can see what the combination of cattle being run in perennial trees, the combination of, running through, it's endless how many ways we could trial it. But what I'm saying is I believe that there'd be a way to bring that number of years down, bring the recovery period down substantially through proper management.
I agree. And I think personally, my intuition is the secret is enzymatic systems that are custom designed to cleave or fracture the molecules of those forever chemicals, because enzymes, that's what they do. They break things down and they put things together. Mm-hmm. And I think someone with the biochemistry skill and the chemistry skill to research enzymatic systems, and you look at the power of the mycorrhiza to literally dissolve rocks and feed the minerals to the plants.
Yeah.
We could look right at the mycorrhiza, the chemicals they produce, and we could even custom breed fungi to break down key chemicals. So I think I agree with you. I think there's a lot of things, but the real point that I'm trying to highlight, and I'm glad that you shared what you shared, because that's very important. But what I'm trying to highlight is it's really important for people to stand up against the use of these chemicals, because, mm-hmm. I mean, not only do they cause cancer and hormonal imbalances and brain problems, I mean, the shit just hits the fan. I mean, remember, only 4 to 6% of all the food eaten in the world is grown organically. That means 94 to 96% of every person's food out there is loaded with these chemicals. And no wonder we spent $3 trillion last year managing diabetes alone.
And the stupidest part about it is that the reason people say, oh, well, that's what's affordable. They say, oh, well, not everybody can afford to buy better food, right? Well, the stupid thing about it is if the government, through our tax dollars, wasn't subsidizing the production of this unhealthy food,
right,
we could be producing organic and regenerative, high-grade, chemical-free, like incredibly nutritious food at quantity and be competitive with conventional, if not more affordable than conventional.
And we'd be getting smarter and healthier every day instead of dumber and dumber.
but the reason why it's what's affordable and available to most of the population is because our tax dollars are subsidizing those practices. And what we have to remember is that we vote with our dollars.
Yes.
It's like there's a lot of ways that you can go cast a vote or state your opinion, vote in local polls, vote for a presidential election, yada, yada, yada. But when it comes down to it, if you're not buying it, they're not making it. If you're buying it, you are voting for another round of it to come your way. So
absolutely. It's the only real vote there is.
Pretty much money talks. And that's back to Bill Gates again, and back to the very scary things happening on very large levels. If you follow that money, it tells the whole story.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a funny thing how everything kind of can come back to money in a way, but it clarifies things. It's a clarifying substance. You can use it to create extreme change. And you can also use it to essentially solidify very practices on either end of the spectrum. And the people who are wielding the largest amount of the money right now in the agricultural space, unfortunately, are on the side of this agro-industrial machine.
Yes, but only because the public is so ignorant and they don't really realize what's happening. And that's why we're devoting the time to what we're talking about right now. If you guys want to hear the rest of this amazing podcast with Jake, go to paulchek.com. You can get your podcast membership for less than a cup and a half of Starbucks coffee a month, right? So you get 4 of these amazing conversations a month. Jake and I will be right back for you guys, the members. Jake, just for the public edition, I'd love for you to share where people can find you and any other resources you want to share.
Yeah, sure. I appreciate that. As far as where to find me, you can find me and our farm, Cedar Springs Farm, my wife, Megan, and our children. We're here in Hotchkiss, Colorado on Instagram. It's Cedar Springs Farm, one word, on Instagram. And we showcase a lot of the techniques we've been talking about throughout the episode. I take that account with me when I go do projects for clients. So when we do big ecological restoration projects and agricultural, adjustments on pieces of land all over the world, really, I try to document it and use it educationally. Also look up Restoration Agriculture Development. It's the company that me and Mark Shepard are working through and doing a lot of these systems on. So Mark's got his book, Restoration Agriculture. It describes in great detail a lot of the techniques that, I've utilized on my own farm and adapted for the high desert. But no matter what region you live in, you'll find techniques that are adaptable to where you live in that book. What I tell you too is, beyond myself, just find and connect with local regenerative farmers in your own region. Find people who, they don't have to even be necessarily regenerative. Find farmers who you trust, who you can have a relationship with, who are using practices that you agree with, that you want for your family. And
if you buy from our sponsor, Wild Pastures, it's all regeneratively farmed meats, and they sell wild caught fish. So Autumn Smith, founder of Paleo Valley, who's also the founder of Wild Pastures, and her husband have all carefully vetted these farmers. So they're of the highest standards. Their animals are raised in very exactly what Jake's describing here. So remember, I don't let anyone sponsor the podcast that doesn't have values that are a match for mine, which are exactly what my podcasts are all about. So don't forget that. So please check Jake's resources out. Do you have visitors ever come visit your farm, Jake?
Absolutely. We love having people here and showing them our systems. And if you can't make it here in person, I recommend checking out that YouTube video, the one that you saw. Maybe there's a way to post a link to that YouTube video.
Oh yeah, the one with Mimi and Chase.
Well, there's or you know what? Not that one. There's another YouTube video. Maybe you haven't seen this one. I thought maybe you.
I just saw the podcast.
So a friend of mine, one town over, Stefano, he made an amazing YouTube video. It's a farm tour with drone footage, and I walk you through some of the systems here on the farm. So
if you can forward the URL, we'll put it in the show notes.
Perfect.
All right, you guys, I'm going to close the first half. Jake and I will be back in the extended play for the members, and we have several more interesting things to get into. And Jake, thanks for the first round. Incredibly good conversation. Very important. And lots of love to all you guys. See you in the extended play for the members. Aho.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Spirit Gym with Paul Chek and today's guest, Jake Takiff. If you'd like to continue listening to their conversation, you can join Paul's Spirit Gym podcast membership. When you subscribe, you'll get access to exclusive extended episodes of Spirit Gym with Paul Chek, members-only Q&A opportunities with Paul, access to the podcast members forum within the Spirit Gym community where you can interact with other passionate listeners, and the chance to purchase exclusive Spirit Gym merchandise. Your support helps keep the show running and allows us to bring you even better and more content. So if you're ready to dive deeper and unlock all these amazing extras, head over to paulchek.com/podcast and become a Spirit Gym podcast member today. You can watch a video featuring Jake's farm on YouTube, see the show notes for the link, and follow the farm on Instagram at Cedar Springs Farm. If you're interested in hiring Luke as a consultant or project manager for your farm or property, you can DM him on Instagram. For more of the resources mentioned in this episode, please visit the show notes page at paulchek.com/podcast, where you can also find details of the special offers from our premier sponsors, Bioptimizers, Paleo Valley, Wild Pastures, and Organifi, as well as links to Paul's social media, his YouTube channels, and his blog. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and a warm review on the podcast platform of your choice. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, and YouTube.